Okay.
Hey there, welcome to the Common Ground Alaska show. I'm so glad you've decided to join us. I wanted to introduce you to Rayne. When I first reached out to Rayne, I was hoping to interview him about raising pigs in Alaska because that's what he's well known for. However, when I asked a couple of animal nutrition questions, I could tell this was a subject that he was very passionate about. So we did a little switch. That's how the livestock nutrition in Alaska show was born. So we're going to talk about subjects like nutritional requirements for cows, pigs, and chickens. We're going to talk about some sustainable, cost-effective ways to feed them. We're going to talk about whether or not you can actually feed your animals entirely Alaska grown. We're going to talk about spent grains and so many other things. So Rayne, I'm so glad that you've decided to join us. We're thrilled to have you, and I'm excited for our people to learn from your hard-earned expertise. So let's start with you just telling us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on today. Yes, I'm very passionate about livestock and livestock nutrition. It's something that I can talk about all day long. I am not the end all, know all of the subject. It's just something that I really like to talk about. So, but there's people out there that know way more, and I'm always trying to learn more. But my name is Rayne Reynolds. I lived here in Alaska for 17 years. I grew up raising Black Angus beef cattle and Yorkshire hogs in the northern part of California. So our family still farms there. And I relocated to Alaska. My wife is born and raised in Anchorage. And when I got to Anchorage and I started living in Anchorage, my wife kept saying, she says, I'm tired of hearing you say that there's no good pigs in Alaska. So why don't you go do something about it? So we ended up moving out to Palmer, and my wife actually bought me two pigs from Delta Junction, and that's what we started with. And over time, we were able to just bring in new genetics to Alaska and breed pigs and kind of get them to where it's a journey. It's, you never want to get to your destination, right? So we're getting them to where we want them just about now, but we can always improve. So with that, challenges came of knowing how to feed a cow or a sheep or a pig in California to just it's so much different up here in Alaska. There's just the obstacles and the challenges that you have, but then sourcing the things that you need, things that were available to me down there in the lower 48 are not available here in Alaska. So there's some huge challenges. And my hat is off to anybody who is farming in Alaska and trying to make it out there. Definitely give them props for wanting to do that up here. It Farming's hard anywhere, but it's super hard here in Alaska.
I think that's a good description of it for sure. It's hard everywhere, but it's super hard here. We definitely have our added challenges, but we
Yes,
don't have snakes.
correct, and we'll celebrate that for sure.
That's right. That's right. So it's funny. It was fun to hear your story when my son got married. One of we he was raised around chickens. We always had chickens when he was growing
Oh,
up, and he said, "I will never, whoever I marry, she'll know from the get-go that we'll never have chickens. Never. I will never have chickens." And you know where the story's going, right?
right.
So of course, when he met his future wife, all she wanted was just a little
Chickens.
chicken coop and just a little flock. And so for their wedding gift, he bought her chickens, and I thought, oh, this must be true love. So it was fun to hear that your wife bought you the pigs because it was something that you knew, and it's true. um there are just challenges up here where we definitely have a disconnect from the lower 48. Um and as I think agriculture is growing up here, I think there's more and more knowledge coming up here for sure. And just better, like you said, better I don't know, better breeding. I'm not a livestock person, but we're improving the lines of the livestock that we have up here, and really focusing on Alaska hardiness, not, what's the cutest and the best and whatever, but what's
Right.
truly going to thrive here.
Yeah, what's going to work? No, that it's huge. The genetics have greatly improved here. There's been a lot of people who have been working to bring in those genetics through artificial insemination, embryo transplant, things like that. And people who have been here a long time for Alaska, getting into that. So it's definitely improving all the way around. Even the feed that we're able to feed our animals has improved big time since I first stepped foot in Alaska. So we are making lots of progress that way.
I think that's pretty cool. That's pretty great. So let's dig into the animal nutrition side of things. So
Absolutely.
first of all, let's just kind of start with the basics. What are the nutritional requirements for the common livestock up here, like cows and pigs, and chickens? Just what's kind of just the general, do you have like a general rule?
Sure. So anytime you are approaching livestock nutrition, well, first thing you have to do is you have to ask yourself, what is your end goal? What are your goals? So, and everybody has different goals, and those goals are going to really drive what you want to do in your feeding program, your feeding protocol. So, some people might have a goal that they want to just put meat on the table. Other people might have a goal that they want to put meat on the table that is the most nutritious or the most healthy, that's free of hormones or pesticides or antibiotics, things like that. So everybody has different goals. Somebody might want to have a goal of they want to do it the most cost effective, which I think that's everybody's goal. But then you run into some things, and then some people just have goals of that they just like one of our goals is I want my kids to learn how to grow. I want them to grow up how I grew up. So I want to pass out everything that I learned from my dad and from my uncle and from my family and from my ag instructors in high school and college. I want to pass on all that information I can. And the really way to do that is to get in there and do it. You can read all the books in the world, and until you're out there actually doing it, that's when you're going to discover what works and what doesn't work. So the basic livestock nutrition for any animal is you want to make up they need the right carbohydrates, they need the right proteins, the right fats, the right vitamins and minerals, and then of course water. And we can talk about every single one of those individually, but when you put all those together, the animals here in Alaska, they really need that energy component of the carbohydrates and the fats. So your sugars and your starches, your glucose, all those things, they need those things to keep warm.
Mhm.
So, and then fiber, obviously in ruminants, fiber, they need those things, and you could feed them and feed them and feed them. And especially this winter, we just weighed some calves yesterday, and I just noticed that they're just kind of behind a little bit of where I want them to be, about 100 pounds behind, because it's been so cold this winter. And you're just throwing the feed bag at them, you're just shaking the feed sack at them and just like pouring the feed to them, and they're just not growing like how you want them to. So you have to look at, okay, is it the environment, which the cold, uh, the dark, the light cycles? Is it the nutrition that's going into them? Where are you sourcing your feed? And is there anything missing? So it's kind of a mystery, and you just become like a detective, and you kind of figure out, okay, what do we have, and what are we missing, and what do we need, and where do we need to get it from? So you just really have to balance those things. And I noticed, we feed a lot higher fat here in Alaska than they do in the lower 48, just because those animals need that energy. And uh, so you just really want to balance all those things. The big kicker is protein. Kind of Alaska grown feeds are they're just lower in protein uh, than in the lower 48. And you really have to, and we don't have the protein sources that they have in the lower 48 up here. So we'll get into what we do have later, but some of the things that we're lacking is those high protein things like soybean, and really the amino acid, and the most important amino acid, the limiting amino acid, is lysine. And our animals, horses, it doesn't matter what it is, horses, cows, pigs, poultry specifically, very much so chickens, they need lysine, that amino acid, and that's just the building block to help synthesize protein. And when we feed forages and grains that are just kind of grains and forages are just kind of low in lysine or void of it altogether in general. So we have to add stuff in to make sure that they have a complete diet, to make sure that it's going to work for them and make it a go. So that's where it gets tricky of having the balance of all those minerals and vitamins, and then your carbs and your starches and your proteins and then your fats, and then water. Water is a huge thing. You need to make sure that your water's clear. And I always tell people, if you're looking at it and you wouldn't drink out of it, then you shouldn't have your animal drink out of it either. So water is a huge challenge. But there's some tips to make it a little easier in the winter to make sure that your animals get the right water and make sure that they get watered right during the winter.
I love that. That's so true. So you mentioned lysine, and that's something that probably needs to be supplemented. What is a way, is that typically supplemented in chicken food, or pig food? So when you're purchasing commercial stuff, even Alaska made commercial stuff, is it typically supplemented with that? Or are you saying that's a supplement we need to be adding to most of our chicken, or to most of our poultry food?
Well, if if you buy a commercially made feed, then they have nutritionists that work with that, and they'll have the balanced amounts of lysine in there that you need.
Okay.
So you'll be okay there. Where we get in trouble is, and Alaskans are infamous for this, is they want to do it on their own, and they want to do it more cost effective, and they want to without, I mean, I no other way to say it, but they want to cut corners a little bit so that they can make it a little cheaper and mix their own feed. Wonderful, great, everything. And you just need to know to make sure that you have the right stuff in there to make sure that your animal's getting what it's need. If it doesn't, your animal's not going to grow. It's not going to reproduce. It's not going to give you milk. It's going to take forever to grow to give you meat. If you're into wool, your wool quality is going to be, lower in sheep and things like that. If you're raising goats, it's just not going to happen. So where can you source those lysine sources? Well, a lot of people don't want to feed soy because they're not into GMOs, or so they're really anti-corn and soy. That's totally fine. There are other ingredients out there that you can feed to make up those things, but not having the soy is a readily accessible protein. It's cheap, considered, if you're considering, to other protein sources, it's a cheap source of protein. But there are other protein sources out there. So, like for pigs, a great source of lysine would be eggs. If you have extra chickens, or like what happens here, the chicken eggs freeze when the kids don't get them in time. So you can throw that whole frozen egg to the pig, and that's a great lysine source. Other good lysine sources up here, a lot of people feed fish meal, so they'll supplement putting fish meal in for soybean. I'm not a huge fish meal guy. I just don't think it's right to feed animals fish meal. It's just, a cow shouldn't be eating fish meal. That's just my thoughts on it. But I'm not going to say it's not a great protein source, because I've seen cows that are eating fish meal, and I got to say they look better than my cows. You can really see the bloom in the hair coat. So it works for them. It just doesn't work for me. So
Right.
it's just something that I can't get over. But I will say the fish meal does work. It is a great lysine source. It's filled with all your amino acids, and it's super high in protein. So to me, Alaska has peas. We do grow peas up here. Delta Junction grows peas. They don't grow enough peas. They have to source a lot out of Canada, but they can grow peas, and peas are a wonderful protein source. You can get in some trouble with peas just in the digestion of how the different digestive systems work, because like pigs, you have monogastric. They have a simple stomach just like us. Cows have 4 compartments to their stomach, so all ruminants and how they eat. Poultry have a gizzard, so they need grit to break down those grains and things like that. So you have these different animals that have different needs, but a good rule of thumb, and this, I tend to find that the horse people and the rabbit people have nutrition figured out. Like the rabbit people are amazing, absolutely amazing when it comes to nutrition, because you can tell rabbits are so sensitive that if you do not have your nutrition down packed, they will not produce for you, and you'll lose rabbits. So you can kind of get away with cows a little bit, where you're not meeting all their nutritional needs for a while, but then they're going to break down on you, and you're going to get a harsh winter. Their immune system is going to go down. If you don't have the right protein, your immune system is going to get attacked. You're going to get sick cattle. So it's so important to get the proper nutrition. But the rule of thumb is to maintain current body weight. So if an animal weighs 1,000 pounds, to maintain that current weight, or just say 100 pounds, you feed 2% of their body weight. So if an animal, for every 100 pounds, you feed 2 pounds of dry feed. But here in Alaska, you need to bump it up. If you want them to gain weight, you need to feed 2.5% or even 3%. So it costs more to feed in these colder weathers. So, there's harsher winters elsewhere, but our winters are so long here. So you're feeding that animal a little bit longer here than you would in Colorado or Minnesota or things like that. So so you really, during the winter, you really need to feed 3%. And then when the temperature drops below 10 degrees, you're even upping your hay even more for your horses and your cows and things like that, because now you need them to keep warm. So they're burning calories, but then that extra fiber helps that the whole process of digestion, rumination, and everything keeps your animals warm. So if they're not protected, they don't have a shelter, if they're not protected from the wind or anything, you're just going to be burning through the hay, and that's why they call them hay burners. So
That's so true.
they burn through the hay. So that's a good rule in the wintertime, 3% of their body weight. So for every 100 pounds, 3 pounds of food. And then in the summertime, you can probably go down to 2.5%. And a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people just, when you go to the fish store and you buy a little pet fish, it tells you to feed the fish the amount of that it can clean up in a certain amount of minutes, right? There's directions on the little fish can of food that tells you what to do. But in livestock, there's so many different goals out there. If you're making wool, you're going to feed them differently than if you're making milk, if you're making meat, if it's a pet. There's so many different things out there. If you're making eggs. So, but that's a good rule of thumb that they really need that 3% per day as a minimum to be able to maintain weight and even gain weight.
Okay. Well, I think that sounds like a great that's a great formula to have for like kind of a starting formula to kind of know what to be feeding and to know what to budget, because that's important too.
Yes.
When you're feeding livestock, it's an investment. It's not just, a couple bags of feed here and there. You're invested in the lives of these critters. So and you want them to come out well. So you kind of touched on this a little bit, but what are the differences are there other differences, I guess I should say, between feeding in the winter and the summer besides just the amount?
You're not going to need to feed as much hay in the summer as you are in the winter. Your quality of hay can be lesser, so you can feed. Hopefully, you can get your animals out on green grass, and they can get everything they need out there on that green grass if it's a ruminant. But a lot of us don't have enough green grass. Our pastures aren't big enough, so depending on your holding capacity and your animals and things like that. So if you're feeding hay through the year, you can feed a lesser quality hay because they're not going to need all that extra hay to just keep warm. So I mean that would be the only difference. Their water requirements are going to go way up in the summer, especially as we get hotter days. So their water requirements are going to go way up, and you want to make sure water equates to everything. The more water they drink, the more they eat. The more they eat, the faster they gain. The faster they gain, the less money that comes out of your pocketbook. That's the recipe right there.
Well, that makes perfect sense. So I want to talk for a second about hay, about shortages, just shortages in general. I know this year hay was kind of hard to find. I know people were kind of scrambling a little bit to make sure they had enough for the winter. And I'm seeing people now who are starting to run out, maybe because winter's lasting a little long. It was not, it wasn't a very kind winter to any of us. So when hay is hard to find, what are some alternate foods that you can count on? Or is it, I guess the flip side, is it better to just plan to import hay when the state can't produce enough?
Well, Alaska definitely has its challenges, and I think we need to look at why do we have some hay shortages. So you have a number of people getting into raising livestock at the most that Alaska's ever had. So just the chicken numbers, the little baby chicks that are coming into Alaska, and the people who are breeding chicks here in Alaska, those numbers are astronomical when you look at them and how much chicken feed is being sold here in Alaska. So but when it comes to hay, I mean, we have some challenges. Weather's always a challenge. And then fertilizer went sky high. So fertilizer costs went sky high. So we have less hay. If the farmer puts on less fertilizer, they're going to get a lower crop. And then we have a lot of horses up here eating a lot of hay, local hay. And then if we just don't have enough hay, then then we need to go outside and bring more hay in from Canada, lower 48, wherever we can get it from. You look at countries like Saudi Arabia, where they don't raise alfalfa at all, but they have a huge dairy industry to produce cow milk, and they're importing all their hay, importing it all. They're bringing it in from Washington and Oregon and Arizona, and uh, and they're bringing it in huge loads. So Alaska needs to do the same thing if we want to grow the livestock industry up here. We only have so much feed that's being grown. So if we like, they ran out of barley this year, so they have to go to Canada to get barley.
Yeah.
So if we don't have it, yes, we have to go outside, and it's going to cost more to do that. But then the cost of your products are going to go up. Your cost of eggs are going to go up. Cost of milk, cost of beef, and things like that are all going to go up.
Yeah, that's definitely true. So I want to kind of circle back to being cost effective, which, as you know, I mean, no matter what your goal is, nobody wants to raise $20 a pound chickens. so we're all looking for ways to do things a little cost effective. And I also want to say, when you were talking about folks kind of doing their own feed, I think another reason that people want to start doing their own feed is because I just like my food that I am eating. It's the same with my livestock. I want to know what they're eating, because
Right.
like we've all seen the shows about when they investigate what's in dog food, and
Oh
we're all
yeah.
grossed out. You know what I mean? I mean,
Right.
like, that's not, I hear you think you're feeding your dog this ultra nutritious food, and it turns out you're feeding him sawdust and a bunch of, half rotten meat scraps. It's not right. So I think that that's another reason that people are kind of moving to building their own feed, and is because then we know exactly what's in our feed, which is going into the meat or the eggs or the milk that we're consuming. So it's kind of
Sure.
taking that level of nutrition one step further.
Right.
So but doing that cost effectively up here can be a little bit tricky. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law live in Oregon, and they use the Joel Salatin chicken
Okay.
feed recipe, and it's pretty easy for them to get all that stuff in, and I can get that same stuff in, but it costs so dang much more
Right.
by the time I get it shipped up here that it isn't cost effective at all. It's way cheaper to buy the Alaska Millen food feed, or we usually get our feed from Fred Smith, who he
Yeah.
has a shop in Big Lake, but he's a farmer in Delta. And
Right.
um, so, so what are some more cost-effective ways that we can go about it, especially if we're wanting to know what our animals are eating?
Sure. One of the great ways is you can like do an added value to the feed that you do get. So you can get a barley seed, and you can sprout it and make it into fodder, and it's going to have enzymes. It's a live food. It's going to have more protein. It's going to be higher protein. So there's a feed right now that you can get a sprouted barley pellet at Animal Farm Supplies has it right now, and I just learned this. That's why I'm sharing it. But I just think, oh, it's just barley. But then you look at the bag, and it's sprouted barley, and it's coming in at 19% protein. That's huge, huge. Because if you look at just regular barley comes in around 12%. But
Wow.
then, but then when you sprout it, it comes in at 19%. So you're getting more bang for your buck right there just by sprouting it. I'm a huge fan of fermented feeds. So you can take that barley and you can soak it for 3, 4, 5, 7 days, whatever it's going to take, and it'll start to smell like the beer making process, and you can ferment your feeds, and that's another live food. And the microbial action of the fermentation process is your animals are going to be eating those animals, which are they're single cell animals, but I mean they're just filled with protein. So you can take that barley that's testing anywhere as low as 9% up to 12%, and you can take it, you can ferment it, and you can make it into something that's going to produce 16% protein. So that's definitely one way. And I notice that people who are real religious about fermenting their feed, I can look at an animal and I can just go, wow, they must be feeding fermented feed, because their animals, you see that bloom on their hair coat, they just look healthy. And just because you're breaking down that grain
Mhm.
by the fermentation process to help the animal digest it better, so it's more usable, so everything's going to be more available for them when they eat it. So I'm a huge fan of fermenting things. It gets really hard in the winter to ferment things, because uh, unless you're going to have your kitchen filled with 5-gallon buckets of barley, or your garage or something like that, there's definitely some super challenges. So I'm really good at fermenting feeds in the summer. Like, I'll fill up big garbage cans, and I'll just pour all the feed in there, start soaking it, and the pigs absolutely love it. In the wintertime, I'll soak a little bit of barley, because space is an issue, and then I'll just give them a couple cups of the fermented feed, just so that they're getting those good bacteria, the probiotics that comes with the fermentation and everything. It's huge for your animals, huge. So we can have a whole show on fermenting feeds, because I think that's one way to get more bang for your buck, sprouting the feed or fermenting it. Definitely, if you buy your feed in bulk locally from people like Fred Smith, or you go to Delta directly, like we deal with um, Dennis Green and Sons. So Bob Green is the son up there that's running it. Great family farm, family up in Delta Junction. If you develop those relationships, it's everything. Everything here is nobody can do any of this on their own. You have to depend on somebody else down the line, down the supply chain line, for what you got going on and what your goals are. So, and also for just the experience and the knowledge that people have. So you really need to develop those relationships. So I mean, everybody should know the Green family or Fred Smith. Like, everybody should get to know these farmers, because that's who's growing their feed. And go up to Delta and see their place. It's gorgeous up there, absolutely gorgeous. If it had a Costco, I could probably move up there. So, but yeah, to learn, it's all about relationships, right? Building those relationships, and you're going to get a better price when you're doing a certain amount of bulk. So I know a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll pull together, and they'll order a truckload of barley and hay at a time. So you get into kind of like a little co-op here in the valley if you live in Palmer or Wasilla, and you put your order in. And so, like, say I order a ton and you order a ton of feed, and we get the neighbor down the road to order a ton of feed, and before you know it, you can start buying in bulk, and you're going to save a ton of money. It used to be half. It used to be half of what it costs to bring up stuff from the lower 48. Of course, it's creeping up in the last couple of days. I notice it's going up, but so is the stuff in the stores. So you're still money ahead by buying in bulk. And a lot of people who raise cattle and hogs in the lower 48 would love the ability to get barley, and we can grow barley like nobody's business up here. And the only reason they feed so much corn down in that country is because they grow corn. They have the ability to grow corn. Well, we have the ability to grow barley. So feed barley. And barley fed beef and barley fed hogs, to me, is a far superior product than corn fed beef. So that's what I would do, is I would try to source as many feeds as you can locally, and then what you don't get, you can go out from there.
Yeah,
So uh
that's kind of how we operate on all things. What can I get in Big Lake? What can I get in the valley? What can I get, Anchorage, Fairbanks, Delta, whatever area, and then kind of spread out from there. And sometimes, and that doesn't mean that I'm buying the first thing I come across. Sometimes, the quality isn't as good, or, whatever. So it's not that I'm saying I'm going to buy from Big Lake, even if it's bad or it's more expensive, but it's just, that's kind of where we start and kind of, bloom our way out. I love
so
what
I,
you said. Oh, go ahead.
so I know that Fred Smith's been doing a really good job with chicken feed, and he's developed a pig feed. I don't feed it. I do know people who do, and I see great success with that, especially the chicken feed. So I see huge successes with it. I've looked at it; it looks really good. I think they put together a really good product, and I hate telling people this, because every time more and more people feed Delta barley, then that's less barley that's available for us to feed. So that's the only downside of it.
Maybe, we've got some unused farmland out at Point McKenzie. I wonder if the barley would do as well here. I don't, that's probably a topic for another day, but I wonder if we've got unused farmland around. I wonder if barley would be a good source. I don't know if it just grows well up there. I don't know if we can do it down here, but something to something to make you wonder.
Right.
When you talked about fodder, it made me think about a couple things. First of all, not only is you don't have to do, we just do these, they're all behind me, but
Yeah.
you know, the planting trays, you
Uh-huh.
know, that have the pots in them that you plant the seed, propagate it, or whatever they're called, the little we'll just fill that with dirt, throw some seed in there, just keep it watered. When it sprouts, you throw the whole thing to the chickens. They enjoy digging through the dirt, they enjoy eating the sprouts that have come up, and
So you
everybody's
could do
happy.
so you can do that without dirt.
Oh, I'm sure you can, yes.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
is it not true? Because I was reading about the difference between sprouts and microgreens have higher nutrient value because they're grown in soil, whereas sprouts don't have that high of nutrient value because they are just grown with water. Is that right?
I don't know. I don't
Okay.
know. That's yeah, beyond my expertise.
Well, the chickens like kind of like, you know, they
Sure.
it's like a little playground. And the
Sure,
thing is,
but if you're feeding cattle fodder, you don't want that dirt in there because
oh
that's
gosh.
right.
No,
But
that's
chickens, yes, even pigs would probably go through it. But no, I know some people who do fodder, and the root systems on that fodder is just so intense. But they'll put barley in there, and then they'll mix it up too. They'll put some black oil sunflower seeds in there, which, by the way, we call it Boss black oil sunflower seeds. It doesn't grow in Alaska. I think it's so fabulous. I think everybody needs to feed it to their chickens, to their cattle, to their goats. The goat people are the ones who figured this out. We're feeding it to our rabbits now. So we feed it to everything because it's got fiber, it's got protein, and it's a higher fat source.
aha.
So it just really helps the animals out big time.
Yeah, that's what we feed our chickadees all winter long too, right?
Right.
So the other thing, the other advantage I think to fodder is that it kind of gives them a pick me up, just like we can use in the wintertime. We can use something else, you know, just something to make us happy. The poor chickens are just in this little tiny coop. They don't get to be outside. They don't get to do their normal scratching, you know, just live what God created them to do, which is to be kind of, you know, in the dirt. And so I feel like we're giving a gift to our chickens while they're faithfully laying eggs for us all winter long. So um so that was my other thought on fodder. Fred Smith has, and this is absolutely not a commercial for Fred Smith. I'm sure there's other people too, but he has whole feed. So you get you know, you can every component of the feed, it's not milled, it's not pelleted, it's just the sunflower seed and the barley and whatever. And our chickens didn't really adjust to that very well, but now that I've thought through it, I've thought, well, I bet they would love it if it was sprouted, though. Then they would think that was pretty great.
Right.
So I think that's plus again, you know exactly what you're getting, which I think is important. Yeah, so I kind of a, because we're, you know, one of our goals is sustainability. Let's talk about feeding your animals Alaska grown. I know people who are doing it, but man, they don't make it sound easy. So let's kind of talk about being nutritionally properly feeding our livestock Alaska grown food. What, in your opinion, is it possible, or
Yes,
is
totally
it
possible.
feasible?
Yeah. Is it feasible is another question. Yeah, it's totally possible because we have the ability to grow peas here. So, we can grow hay. We can grow, different kinds of hay. We can grow peas. We can grow barley. And you really have like the building blocks that you need right there in that diet. Uh, if you feed fish meal that's sourced here in Alaska, you definitely can do it because you're going to get those high protein levels. Uh, More and more, I know they're experimenting with growing alfalfa, and we need to get into talking about alfalfa here in a second. But I know that they're more and more they're growing. Like here in Palmer, we actually buy our wheat from Vanderweel Farms and grind it and make our own bread. So wheat, I know you can grow wheat, and that's a great chicken feed. So yes, can it be done? Yes, it can. Uh, of course, you have to add the vitamins and the minerals in. So you're gonna have to get that and source that from outside. To me, like I just want the best for the animals. So like I want to add in more than what's available. So like you have to feed quite a bit of peas to get the protein levels high because for example, soy is 40% protein, where peas are 25% protein. So you have to feed a lot of peas, and it gets super expensive super quick. But peas are a great feed. You just don't want to feed, you want to grind it or soak it, because like hogs will get digestive upsets. And actually, I've seen hogs prolapse if they get too much peas. So your question is, can it be done? Yes, it can be done. At one time, we were doing it. We were just feeding peas and barley to the hogs and making it happen. What we found is Delta would run out of peas. So then we have to go outside. So it's just like, and I want my diet to be consistent, because anytime you switch an animal's diet, you have to do it over, you know, 5, 7, 10 days real slowly. So one of the challenges that we're dealing with right now, especially rabbit feed, they keep running out of rabbit feed. And we only have a couple rabbits. It's the kids' project. So we have a dozen rabbits, but what I find is, like, I have to go to the store and buy numerous bags of rabbit feed because they keep running out of, there's a issue in the supply chain where, oh, the ship didn't come in today.
Mhm.
Or, like I heard one time a couple years ago where a whole connex of feed fell into the ocean. So there's some super happy fish
That's
wherever
right.
that happened, right? So uh yeah, so things happen. Things happen. We're at the end of the supply chain, so things happen. So you really have to prepare. And it, to me, I've run, like last year alone, I can think of 3 times where I run into, we're feeding a certain brand of rabbit feed and they ran out of rabbit feed, and now like you have to switch your rabbits over to a new feed overnight, and that's never good for the animal.
Yeah.
You're going to get all kinds of digestive issues with that. So that's the hard
And
part.
and they give you dirty looks. They are not happy when you
They
switch their
do.
feed.
Yeah, correct.
They're
Correct.
like,
So
they
I
don't give
switched
you
I
that.
switched the pig's feed up quite a bit, because like if there's an open bag of feed at the feed store and they can't get rid of it or something like that, they'll sell it to you, discount it. So uh, I'll be able to like give that to the pigs. You're right. I mean, like I'm like, hey, this is like some really good, cattle feed, and the pigs like look at it and they're like, oh, what are you giving me? And so it's different. Yeah.
You're trying to kill me.
Right.
Oh, I think that's good. So, I want to touch on, for a moment, this is what spurred the conversation with us about animal nutrition when we were talking, because we have a brewery that's just super close to us. It's about 5 minutes away. And so my thought was, as we're switching from having animals year round, to we are growing our protein, and we're growing chicken and pork because we can grow it in a season. Because by golly, at some point in time, I am going to Hawaii in the winters at some point. And having all these farm animals and stuff, I mean, it's great, it's fabulous, and I'm sure we'll go back to it, but I just want a couple of years without being
Sure.
tied down in a
Yeah.
winter. So one of the things that we talked about was pig feed, and I said I was excited to have this brewery right here so we can feed spent grain. And you are the first person who has ever been like, let's put the skids on that, for let's talk about it. And you weren't discouraging at all, but let's talk about spent grain. I know that there are some definite disadvantages to it. I believe there's advantages, especially for me, because it's right here. Like I could literally drive there every day and it wouldn't bother me. It's I can go in my sweatpants and nobody's gonna care. But most people don't have that kind of small town, super close to you
Right. And
advantage.
that's where you're going to excel in feeding spent grains or byproducts.
Mhm.
So there's all kinds of byproducts. So I spent quite a few years on a hog and cattle operation, just feeding byproducts. So I have a big background in feeding byproducts. We would bring it in by the semi loads. It was a recycling center, so it was a garbage dump, and they were utilizing hogs, goats, and sheep and cattle to eat off, donuts and breads and restaurant waste. And beer grain was a huge part of those diets. So I have quite a bit of experience feeding beer grain or distilled grains. Let's talk about the pros of it first. The pros are it's super high in protein. You got to love it for its protein. I mean, you're talking 28% up to 30% protein. Huge. And then it's really good fiber, like great fiber. So your animals aren't going to bloat on it. because in the beer making process or the alcohol making process, they're robbing all the sugars and starches out of there. So that's what they're using to make beer. So the leftover product is huge for your animals. There's a huge benefit. As far as like feeding it to ruminants, you can feed it to ruminants and you're going to do really well. Your animals are going to look great because of that extra protein. But just because it says 28% protein doesn't mean that that's the available protein to them. So that's a whole different discussion too. But so there's definitely pros. Like in your situation, you can go, you're right there. I would feed it all day long if the brewery brought it to me. But
Exactly.
for me to spend gas or fuel to go get it, and then the time to go get it and to bring it back, it's 70% water. So you're not dealing with apples to apples when you're dealing with hauling dry grain versus brewer's waste or beer grain. So, but it's high in B vitamins. So because in the process of fermentation, you got the yeast in there and everything. So it's super high in B vitamins. So there's a lot of pros to it. If you're feeding it to ruminants, I'm a huge fan to feeding it to your 4 compartment animals. Feeding it to pigs is a whole different ball of wax. You definitely have challenges there because the pigs don't need that much fiber. It's just too much fiber for them, and they can't utilize all the protein out of it. So to pigs, to me, you're really not gaining any advantage to feeding to the pigs unless you mix it with something like milk or eggs or something like that, and it's not costing you to get it to you. But it's a great filler to make your pigs happy. But as far as the pigs growing on it, I just don't see the advantage. You never really want to feed more than 30% of an animal's diet. And I think what happens is when people get free beer grain, they just pour it to them. And it's void of fats and it's void of starches that the animals need for the energy. So cows have the ability to take some of that fiber and break it down and make it into energy to a certain degree, but pigs do not. So pigs will really suffer if you just feed it to them. Now, a lot of people will take barley and they'll take beer grain and they'll mix it together. Your pigs, they're just not going to grow as fast because they just don't have. It's probably going to be void of lysine. You just don't have the right nutritional mix in there. Now, if your goal is you really don't care how long it takes for those pigs to get up to market weight, then yeah, you can go for it. If your goal is to breed and to have reproduction, you're going to have some reproductive issues, and that beer grain molds in the summer pretty easily, and you're going to have those myotoxins in there that's going to suffer with feeding to your pigs, and then especially your pregnant cows. I won't feed it to pregnant cows. I know people who do, and they do fine. To me, it's just not worth the risk of losing the pregnancy with those molds. In the wintertime, feed it to pregnant cows all day long because it's not going to. Can we hit pause?
Yeah.
So just you really have to just be cautious of when you're feeding it, that you're hauling water, the molds, the expense in the fuel, feeding it to animals for reproduction. If you're feeding it for meat, go for it. It's a great source out there if it's close to you like it is for you. So there's pros and cons to everything. And I find that if you cut corners like in one place, you're going to pay for it down the road somewhere else. So the main thing with beer grain is that it's totally filled with phosphorus. It's all phosphorus and void of calcium. And in nature, your calcium to phosphorus ratios are higher calcium, lower phosphorus. So naturally, like it's going to be like 7 parts calcium to 1 parts phosphorus. Well, it screws up the whole calcium to phosphorus ratio. So you're going to have issues when you're milking cows and things like that. So you need to up your calcium. If you're going to feed beer grain, you need to add limestone to it or some kind of calcium source so that you can fix those calcium to phosphorus ratios. You want to have 2 to 1, 2 parts calcium to 1 part phosphorus. That's the thing. And that alfalfa, high in calcium. But we didn't even get into alfalfa, and I need to talk about alfalfa because that's like normally what I talk about. I just want people to know that alfalfa and sea kelp, but sea kelp's super expensive. But we feed sea kelp to everything so that they're getting all their vitamins and minerals. That's our mineral that we give to the animals. So if you can get Alaska source sea kelp, then you can feed all your minerals to your animals. But I think our sea kelp's sourced out of Canada. Uh, but sea kelp is amazing. But here's the thing about alfalfa. Alfalfa will cover a multitude of sins in your feeding program. So if you are lacking something else in your feeding program somewhere else, and you have alfalfa and you're feeding alfalfa, it's going to cover you nutritionally. That's the amazing part about alfalfa. So I just wanted to get this in there that alfalfa, I love
Okay.
alfalfa, love alfalfa, because it's just going to really help you in your nutrition.
Okay, so I have never done alfalfa for livestock, but I was raised on a horse ranch. And so, and we had to be super careful with alfalfa because it's a hot
Right.
food and you can't overfeed alfalfa to horses. So, is there a possibility of overfeeding alfalfa to to the livestock that we're talking about?
You're mostly adding it as a supplement,
Okay.
but technically you could feed your cows all alfalfa. You can feed your horses all alfalfa. A lot of people don't know this. You just have to do it slowly. You
Yeah.
just have to bring them up slowly. I know of an Alaskan that moved down to Oklahoma. She's in Oklahoma now, and she got down there and they only feed their horses alfalfa. That's it, 100% alfalfa, nothing else. And she said they're the healthiest horses that she's been around. So it can be done. Alfalfa is expensive, so we're probably not going to do it here. But we do add alfalfa to, like, we milk a cow, so we have a dairy cow, and she's getting a lot of alfalfa because it's super high in protein and all kinds of good stuff for her in there. And then even our beef cows, will supplement them with alfalfa in the wintertime just to boost their nutrition a little bit. It's green, right? Just like we were talking about fodder earlier.
Yep.
It's just has more feed value than any other feed out there, in my opinion. It's just huge. I'm a huge fan of alfalfa, and I can't wait for Alaska to grow more alfalfa.
That was going to be my next question. So you said, is it starting? And are they growing it here in the valley, or is it a Delta thing, or is it a Southern thing?
So University of Alaska Fairbanks, they've been growing it here in Palmer at the research
At the
station,
experiment farm?
at the experiment farm.
Okay.
And I know that Vanderweel grew, I think it was 5 or 10 acres last year of alfalfa, and they're having some success with it. So I hope that continues, because that would be a game changer in feeding livestock here in Alaska if we have access to alfalfa.
Okay, I think that's huge. That's good to know. That well, anytime we can diversify what we're able to grow. And it's similar to when I talked to the Ben at 40% Ranch. His feed is it's unconventional, I guess is the word. He's feeding
Uh-huh.
beets and he's feeding potatoes and anyway, but he was talking about how he makes it work for him.
Right.
And I think that is a part of, like when you said you don't feed the fish meal to your cows, but other people do, and they're successful.
Right.
I think that's a huge part of that's a strength that Alaskans have is we're independent and we're willing to think outside the box.
Right.
Because we have
Right.
to. But it can also be our downfall if we're not doing the research. Like you said, if you can get the spent grain for free or close to it. If I were to go get every day barrels of spent grain and feed it to only to our
Right.
pigs,
Right.
and if it got a little mold in there or whatever, I mean, the sustainability of that, we're not gonna have good meat. They're not gonna thrive, which is what we
Right.
want.
You're going to have
So
issues. Yeah.
yeah, of course. And then, like you had said, with the sustainability, if we were planning to breed our pigs, we could run into real issues with mold
Right.
and stuff, and
Right.
with reproductive issues. So I think if we can marry the two, if we can be independent and think outside the box, but yet apply the science that's needed to make sure that our animals are getting the nutrients that they need, then there's no stopping us. And especially when we're bringing in diverse new crops like alfalfa or beets and
Right.
whatever for animal feed, it's we can totally do this and make it much more sustainable. But we just gotta make sure we're thinking
Yeah,
through it.
no. I mean, beets are huge nutrition.
Yeah.
You can feed potatoes. If you're going to feed potatoes to hogs, I suggest cooking it to break it down a little bit. You can feed raw potatoes to cattle.
Uh-huh.
I know here in the valley they feed a lot of carrots, like the seconds that aren't marketable to go into the grocery store, and they were pulling blood on those cows that are eating the all those carrots, and I mean, like they're basically eating carrots and hay. and the vitamin A levels on those cattle were just like through the roof in the blood test. So yes, you can feed byproducts, you can feed bakery waste. There's all kinds of things. If you do it, you just need to figure out uh, like what's going to work for your animal, and then kind of figure out what's void in your nutritional program, and kind of fill that void. So there, you can get outside the box and think those are all great things. You just have to make sure that it's working, because for a while we were feeding beer grain to our pigs, and that's why I steer away from feeding it to hogs. I'll feed it to cattle, but I don't feed it to hogs because we ran into so many issues reproduction wise,
Yeah.
that I just want to stay away from it. I would feed it to pigs that I'm producing for just meat, because if they get into a little bit of mold or something like that, it's not going to affect them where they're going to lose an entire litter or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think you're okay there.
Yeah. Well,
I don't like feeding mold to cows, but sometimes you get a bit of moldy hay that they can handle it. The cows will either work their way around the mold, or they can eat a certain amount. Um, I've seen people feed really really ugly looking hay. The cows, they'll do what they need to do. I think horses can do it too, but horse people will say no, so that's a whole different conversation.
and it's a lot of money in vet bills when things
Right,
go
right, correct.
south.
So like that, and there you said it right there. If you take the shortcuts, you're going to end up like you might have gotten, ooh, this bale of hay was the cheapest one there, but because it was, like the quality of it was less, you're going to end up paying for it in a vet bill later on down the road.
Yeah.
You said it right there. So
Yeah, I think, yeah. So I think to kind of sum it up, a couple of things stood out to me that you said. Number one, you were talking about rabbits and I can't remember the other animal. Oh, rabbits and horses. I feel like rabbits are kind of what's it called? The canary in the mine or whatever.
oh
When
yes,
things aren't going right
yeah,
nutritionally, rabbits will let you know. And and
correct,
and you have the opportunity or the ability to turn things around.
right,
As a cow, it's possible that you can think that you're feeding them nutritionally sound food, and a pig
correct,
especially, and not know until you have major problems that things
yes,
maybe weren't as good as you thought. And so that's the importance of knowing that what you're doing nutritionally is working, because like you said, um, it's, your pigs are fine, but then they start aborting litters of pigs because they have been eating this, they've got this mold inside of them. And I don't understand the science of it all, but they aren't really the canary in the mine. They're not telling you until, till you're having issues.
right,
So if you're raising cows and pigs and chickens, though, I don't know, chickens just do their thing. Chickens go along and then they die, and then they go along and then they die. That's just kind of chickens. We rarely have a sick chicken. We either have a perfectly alive chicken, or then you
right,
go in and the chicken's dead. Um, which is rare, but we haven't had a lot of issues with just sick chickens. So it seems like you want to be making sure it's important to be making sure that your food is nutritionally sound, and that it's not just nutritionally sound, but that it's clean and that it's quality enough that your animal's going to thrive, or the problems down the road could be pretty tremendous. And it's such an investment to grow these animals out,
correct,
and to find out, who knows when that, they're not growing properly, or you're not going to get to wait before winter comes on, so you're not going to be able to butcher till next spring. Now you got to feed that animal all winter long and keep it growing, and
right,
um all of those things are a bummer. So keeping that base nutrition is really important.
absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, did you have anything else that you wanted to add? Did you feel like we covered it all? I think we did a good job.
No, I would just say weigh your feed. Like know how much you're feeding on a dry matter basis. That's where it gets hard when you're feeding like wet potatoes or beer grain, because it's wet.
Uh-huh.
So make sure to weigh your feed. So that's what I would end with. And alfalfa covers a multitude of sins in your nutritional program.
I think that's really good advice. Well, Rayne, thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the
Yeah,
time in your
thank you,
busy,
Katie.
busy life, and we appreciate you very much.
Great. Well, it's great hanging out with you this morning and talking about something that I definitely love, and hopefully I would just say that if people are going to get into livestock, reach out to a mentor. to learn from. And if anybody has any questions or anything, I'm always available to help out a fellow farmer. So
That sounds good. Thank you so much, Rayne. I appreciate it.
all right.